Hi, my name is Dawid Pieper, and I'm happy that you are listening to my presentation on citation analysis for monitoring evidence-based research, a systematic review of meta-research studies. I'm presenting on behalf of EFRA's Working Group 4 that you will be introduced to in a couple of minutes. I declare that I'm not aware of any conflicts of interest related to the topic of this presentation. Many of you will already be aware of that EFRA's, evidence-based research, is a 4-year European Union-funded cost action with over 40 countries participating globally, aiming to encourage researchers and other stakeholders to use an evidence-based research approach while carrying out and supporting research, thus avoiding redundant research. EFRA's consists of 4 working groups, and there will also be presentations from other working groups held at this conference. My working group is number 4, focusing on meta-research on EBR implementation. What you can see here is the original plan for working group 4 as it was formulated in the application. The overarching goal is to identify and implement a monitoring plan enabling to check whether researchers stick to the principles of EBR when conducting and reporting their research. When it comes down to thinking about a way to monitor the implementation of EBR, we need to answer the simple question how to evaluate the use of EBR. EBR has been defined before, but the question is how to measure it, how to measure EBR. And of course, this is not a simple but a head-aching question we had to deal with in our group. And it becomes even more complicated the longer you think about it. The first challenge is to find a way to measure EBR at all. However, when you think of setting up a plan to monitor the implementation of EBR, the way to measure EBR needs to be rather simple instead of being very complex and time-consuming. We need something that could be implemented on a wide scale. These questions and resulting challenges will really make it hard, if not even impossible, to fulfill all milestones listed here. And this is the reason why my presentation will focus around the first milestone highlighted in bold, a list of monitoring methods and outcomes of relevance for monitoring the implementation of EBR in clinical research. The original plan was to perform a systematic review to investigate this. However, after several rounds of considerations, our group came to the conclusion that this would be hardly feasible. We felt that we were somewhere in between, ending up with 0 or 100 hits to screen, 100,000 hits to screen, of course. But luckily, and as you all know, redundant research should be prevented. Therefore, we chose a pragmatic approach and settled up on an ongoing large EBR review that might meanwhile have been finished or is close to be completed. I do not want to go into the details of this large EBR review as I'm not part of it, but please note that there will be other presentations today and tomorrow also using its results. What we, as Working Group 4, needed to know about the review was that it was conducted in a way that all studies allowing for the identification of methods to measure and monitor the implementation of EBR would have been included in this large review. So our starting point was a list of included studies in this review, and we checked whether some of the included studies could potentially be used to meet our specific goals. By doing so, we have identified some interesting approaches, such as cumulative meta-analysis or tri-sequential analysis. However, the most frequent and interesting approach was citation analysis. What is citation analysis? Citation analysis has been defined as the examination of the frequency, patterns, and graphs of citations. In other words, in a citation analysis, the citations referenced in a manuscript are the area of investigation. I have a few examples of citation analysis at the end of my presentation. So, as a working group 4, we agreed on conducting a review aiming to identify methods for monitoring the implementation of EBR by examining the characteristics and application of citation analysis in the EBR context, that is, justifying and/or designing or placing research results in the context of earlier research. Here you can see some details of our methods, most of them being quite standard. The most important part is probably the fact that we grouped the included studies along the three aims of EBR: justification, design, and placing in context. In total, we have included 27 studies. When grouping these studies, we found that most were classified to justify new research, followed by informing the design. However, important to note that there were several manuscripts that were grouped to more than one category. We see that citation analysis seems to be a rather new type of study in biomedical research. This was what the large review was focused on, biomedical research. We did not investigate other fields, what might be interesting to do in future. We found most studies being restricted to a given field or area of interest, mostly where the authors were affiliated with. The unit of analysis was RCT publications in most cases. There are RCT's publications as opposed to RCT protocols or funding applications, which should be considered as two distinct entities. We have observed a huge variety in the number of units included and analyzed, ranging from 25, what is a rather small sample, to more than 1,000 studies. Most authors were interested in citations of systematic reviews and meta-analysis. There was also a huge variety in how the sample was derived, and the rationale for it was often not reported. And the same is also true for the corresponding sample size, while data extraction methods were often applied as similar to standard systematic review methodology. Now, let us start with a few examples. This is a study published by Engelking and colleagues in 2018. They analyzed whether existing systematic reviews were mentioned in RCTs published in top anesthesiology journals as a rationale for conducting trials and for discussing results. The table shows the number of systematic reviews cited in the sections of the manuscripts. The main result can be considered to be the number of systematic reviews that cited appropriately a systematic review. Needless to say that the result of 20% is improvable. However, important for us to note that this is an easy and pragmatic approach to run a citation analysis, and that is potentially applicable on a wide scale. Let us keep the Engelking study in mind when looking at this figure here. As we remember, the Engelking study analyzed whether systematic reviews were cited. The approach taken by the authors in this study here is more differentiated. They categorize the citations according to whether they were simply cited, described, or discussed. Describing might be considered to be superior to citing as it provides more details. Going one step further would result in discussing the citation of interest, what can be very important if we keep in mind that there's a lot of bad research out there. Finding something to cite is easy, while finding a good citation is much more challenging and time-consuming, of course. This is my last and favorite example. The idea in this study was to examine whether a given review had an impact on subsequent research. The publication of this review can be considered to be the starting point of the study. 136 RCTs were published at least 2 years after the publication of the review. 72.8% cited the review, what can be considered as a good result. However, an in-depth analysis shows that the impact of the review on the design of subsequent research is low. When you have a look at the figure, white bars represent clinically relevant trials as assessed by the authors, while blue bars represent studies that can be called unnecessary or clinically non-relevant in light of the results of the review published in 2000. Overall, I consider this to be a very interesting publication and approach. Interesting to note that this study has been published in the BMJ. So overall, we found that there is a high heterogeneity in the conduct of citation analysis. There are simple approaches and there are much more elaborated approaches that you could go for. Nevertheless, we need to keep in mind that monitoring approaches might rather require simple approaches that can be applied on a wide scale. With respect to citation analysis, many questions are still open and need to be discussed in future. I mean, the most important question is how to conduct a good citation analysis and how to report it appropriately. There's still a lot of room for research in this area, and we hope to be able to work on that in our working group. Thank you very much for listening. Bye.